Hello and welcome to Retail Week's latest virtual panel, which looks into trading trends from a very different Christmas. This is part of our Golden Quarter content series, which covers everything you could possibly need to know about Christmas 2020. So if you haven't seen it already, please check it out on our website. I'm Gemma Goldfingal, Features Editor of Retail Week, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar. And I'm joined by our expert panel, Emily McWoe, Customer and Growth Director at On the High Street, Rob Wood, Head of Online at The Entertainer, Andy Harding, Managing Director of OpenPay UK, and Georgia Glanville Harrison, Director of Customer Success for EMEA at Braze. Now, I think we can all agree Christmas 2020 was truly unlike any other. We've had lockdowns, bans on family gatherings, and stores closing, reopening, and closing yet again. Who would have ever thought we'd experience a Christmas week where we'd see tumbleweed rolling down Oxford Street? M&S boss Steve Rowe termed trading conditions near impossible over the Golden Quarter, and it's hard to disagree. Our expert panel is here to, in some cases, share war stories from this very crazy Christmas, but also delve into the big trends we saw in this very unusual year. So we're going to be looking into what really happened during Christmas 2020, what were the big shopping trends that we can expect to continue into 2021, and what changes retailers should make in light of all of this. So let's jump in. Rob, I'm going to start with you. Christmas 2020, how was it for The Entertainer?
Chaotic, probably the best way to describe it. All over the place, and we almost had 2 or 3 different periods of trade right across the Christmas season. Clearly, September, October, we had what felt almost like as normal a Christmas as it can be. We had our retail stores open. They actually traded when they were open very well. So from a retail point of view, almost up until sort of the start of November. I wouldn't say it was normal well because it wasn't, but it followed similar patterns to last year. Clearly, then the start of November, stores went into what we call dark mode internally. So that's where we were offering click and collect only during the lockdown. And what we saw, I mean, we'd already seen a huge acceleration into online over the first half of the year, but that pattern absolutely continued right the way through November, and then didn't really slow down until Christmas. And the other things we saw from a trends point of view was there was I think a fairly deliberate effort by retailers to bring demand forwards. I think everybody got their fingers burnt with fulfillment in sort of March and April, where suddenly the switch was flicked and huge amounts of demand moved into online. And nobody was really quite ready for the capacity and quite ready to cope with the volumes. So I think everybody's marketing calendars were kind of aligned to let's see what we can do to bring trade forward in November, because if we get to December, we won't be able to get stuff out. And I think that kind of concerted effort by retail to warn customers that you need to shop early really paid dividends. And lots of people, ourselves included, brought forward our Black Friday deals. So we had a huge November online, and then obviously December was chaos again with stores open and then closed again. And I think one of the key things we saw in that was that fulfillment became king. So our 30-minute click and collect service was incredibly popular. Customers were still incredibly keen to make sure they could get hold of their stuff. So we saw express the delivery became much more important. And actually, from a demand point of view, we saw a bigger November than we had seen previously, and a smaller December, which I think is pretty much what most retailers would have seen. But the trends really are around fulfillment and making sure that customers got what they were after.
Yeah. How about you, Emily? Was it, as an online retailer, was it equally as chaotic? Was it a bit more gentle for you in terms of demand and coping with all the various changes that we've seen?
Well, I mean, we're purely online, so I guess we didn't have to really deal with any brick and mortar dramas for sure. And I think that whilst obviously this is the golden quarter, I think we've had a lot of time to prepare with this pandemic, and we've had a other lockdown prior to that. So I think, not on the high street, we've really learned from the first lockdown, learned to become more agile. Obviously, we have a plan in place. We plan Christmas well ahead. But some of the things that we've learned from the first lockdown, we really sort of try to prepare ourselves for any sort of situation coming into what you call the golden quarter. In terms of the Christmas demand, we started to see it pick up at the beginning of September. So I think there was definitely a lot of people across the industry talking about the early demand, really thinking about the consumer mindset and how they would really sort of prep in case of. So we really tried to think about that. So how we would potentially have the agility and really have the ability to sort of change our marketing plan and bring them forward in line with the customer demand. So the agility part of our marketing plan was quite crucial. In terms of what we've seen with the consumer, obviously, we've seen that the online shopping penetration has significantly increased since the beginning of the year. That obviously continued and was exacerbated as we went into lockdown, as essentially that was the only options for the consumer. We've seen also lots of different movement as well. I mean, we're a marketplace supporting small businesses. So we've really seen that there was this social purpose and really trying to shop to shop with a purpose. So we've really found that, our message around shopping small worked very well and resonated. There was a lot of shopping small, shopping local, really supporting the economy. So that really translated well for us. And then we saw a lot of trends around, thinking of you and just because gifting. So we found a lot of trends around letterbox gifting as well as hugs and things like that. So really this sort of like token of thoughtfulness and of love that people will send to each other. So really a Christmas that was a lot more personal than the others. And I think that sort of our brand message really resonated well with the consumer. And I think the final thing that I wanted to mention is around categories. So we did see some category pickup. So home and food and drinks, especially for us, was something that picked up significantly. So really around the decoration and really trying to make Christmas probably a lot more homey than it was in prior years. Similar to Rob, we've seen a lot more earlier demand. November was really, really strong, the strongest November we've had in our history, and December was equally as strong. I think in December, obviously, we hit some more challenges, I guess, with deliveries, of course, and also, with our small businesses, we've been trading very well throughout the year, and I think, it got to a stage where we really needed to balance out what the capabilities are in terms of, responding to the demand and also meeting the customer expectations. So I think, there is, from our perspective as a marketplace, we had to do a lot of work with our partners and with our customers, but generally was a very successful Christmas.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we've got two very resilient retailers on the line here, that you've both fared quite well during this crazy time. Andy, as a former retailer, I'm sure you're thanking your lucky stars that you haven't been in the coalface this year. Do you think
different Christmas for sure?
Yeah. Do you think this is representative of kind of retail in general? Do you think Christmas was actually all right given the circumstances?
Yeah, I was quite surprised actually. Some of the results coming out of the Christmas period from many retailers, who I thought would have struggled more than they did. We had a lot of bad news coming into Christmas through the peak period. There were a number of retailers that we heard about that had hit the wall or gone into administration, and so I was expecting Christmas, especially given the lockdown and the uncertainty through the period. I thought that the knock-on effect of that would have been a lot worse, but actually, amazingly, a lot of retailers came out with some pretty incredible incredible numbers. ASOS particularly really surprised me, given the a heavy bias towards fashion. Obviously, their ability to pivot into other clothing categories that are in demand more than sort of outerwear or party wear, etc., which is obviously peaks over Christmas time. So I was quite surprised. I thought retailers would struggle more. It was great to see so many retailers coming out, as the guys have just said, having had a really good time. And I think especially those multi-channel retailers who had to close their stores and you'd had to really think about trying to shift their volume into online channels, but also then using their stores to help and leverage their online sales, as Rob was explaining earlier. Using your stores as click and collect locations, and a lot of retailers leveraging that. B&Q did the same. I thought that was really clever, and I think that over the course of the last 6 months or so since the original lockdown, the advances that people have made in progressing their digital capabilities has been quite amazing. And I think that people have talked about 10 years worth of innovation or progression in capabilities in just a 6-month period. I think that really was borne out in the success in some of the retailers over Christmas.
Yeah, I want to delve a bit more into lockdown and what impact it really had. Georgia, I'm going to come to you. What impact did lockdown have across the sector from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think kind of lockdown fueled e-commerce growth by this kind of shift from the age of convenience that we were seeing in 2019 to this age of necessity. So you kind of had people buying their nice to have Christmas presents alongside their need to have groceries online for the first time, for example. And we kind of saw that overall e-commerce growth that everyone else has touched on here kind of really play out in our aggregated statistics across our customers. That was really, really interesting. So we kind of saw this increase of 62% of users coming to retail and e-commerce apps for the first time over the course of last year. And then those kind of new users and new faces being a real driving force behind online purchasing. So 80% of those purchases that happened between May last year and the end of last year coming from those new users. The interesting comparison we get to see from our side as well is how kind of that Christmas period fared in 2020 compared to 2019. And what we were seeing was that retail peak of Black Friday in 2019 was around half of the daily revenue that we were seeing getting logged on e-commerce across kind of the Christmas period of 2020. So we really got to see those new users coming into digital platforms for the first time, and retail responding to accept them online in some instances for the first time. Playing out with that increased shape on digital platforms.
Yeah. Rob, give me kind of some stories from the coalface of what it was like during lockdown, and I guess you had to be incredibly nimble and switch your trading plans quite rapidly. How easy was it to switch from multi-channel to pure play?
Not easy at all, I guess, is the short answer. I think probably the saving grace was we had some time to prepare for it. So we knew from lockdown 1 that if we got to lockdown 2, it was going to be incredibly hard work. And as a business, kind of all the focus is on what happens if in November we have to close our retail stores. Firstly, how do we replace the lost sales? And secondly, then how do we cope with the demand? So what we ended up doing was we put in the IT infrastructure that we didn't have in April last year that would allow us to turn our DC into an e-com fulfillment warehouse and redirect some of our orders there. So that was the plan. And come the start of November, we were very pleased that we'd done that. So our DC up in Banbury, which usually we use to send out pallet loads of stock to stores, we were able to transform into a fulfillment warehouse and route some of our web orders there. And that was absolutely the saving grace for us, I think, in November, and it allowed us to carry on trading as hard as we could. And then in terms of being nimble and trading through it, essentially we had a capacity every day of how many orders we could ship out. My job was basically to hit that number, but not any further. So we were very nimble with our trade, and it was all about turning promotions on and off and getting emails out. We do lots of marketplaces, so we do Amazon and eBay, and it's basically we spent the best part of an hour and a half every morning working through the forecast, making sure that the inbound was going to match the outbound, because that was the way we could have a consistent customer experience right the way through the peak and maximise revenue, which obviously is absolutely key for us with our stores closed.
Yeah, actually, on the capacity note, moving into the golden quarter, we're hearing a lot about the fact that the UK would be challenged in terms of its e-commerce capacity, delivery capacity particularly. Did that ring true? Were there problems with deliveries across the board, or did we just about get away with it?
See, I think we got away with it, and I think the couriers have got to take a huge amount of credit for that. I almost think it was the smoothest peak that we've had. And I think that is simply because we had those 3 or 4 months for everyone to go, if we don't sort this out, we're going to absolutely fall over. Although obviously I'm talking about kind of our internal capacity within warehouses to get orders through the system and get them out, we were equally worried about once we give them to the couriers, are the couriers going to be able to do anything with them? But our partners actually, as couriers, we work with 3 or 4 different partners, and actually we bought a couple of extra couriers on almost as an insurance policy. But they all stood up to the challenge really well. And I think from a customer experience point of view, as long as we're able to manage that message, and that's the key almost for November and December, was to be very clear about exactly when we could deliver and when we couldn't. We actually managed to consistently hit the delivery promise. And obviously that's, when you've got people stuck at home worried about getting Christmas presents in time, that's absolutely the key.
Yeah. I want to talk about the shape of Christmas 2020. Emily, you mentioned that, you were seeing activity as early as September this year. How did, usually we expect the big peaks around Black Friday and then maybe a week or two the week before Christmas. What did it look like this year, the shape of Christmas?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think that's the question that we asked ourselves at the beginning of the quarter, what that quarter was going to be made of and what the seasonality would be looking like. I think it's fair to say that throughout November, we saw some very, very high numbers. There was definitely a lot of question around Black Friday and, whether people would have shopped enough. There was a lot of discounting in the market as well, also trying to grab the attention of customers. So I think really trying to stand out of the crowd was definitely going to be quite difficult. I think generally we had a very successful Black Friday, and we did still see a peak in trade, and really sort of continue to see that peak, as we went into the first couple of weeks of December. So I think generally, it was not necessary. We saw strong trade on a longer time period. November was strong throughout. And then the strong weeks that you've mentioned sort of remained as well.
Andy, obviously you must see a lot of activity from OpenPay in terms of transactions, etc. What did you see for the shape of Christmas 2020?
Well, I think what everyone said, it was early, came earlier. I think everyone had fears about what would happen. There was uncertainty with regards to lockdown and when people would be able to shop. I think everybody felt encouraged to shop early, and was a lot more organised this year than previously. I'm going to speak from personal experience as well. I seem to get all my shopping done for the first time ever. When I was sure that I wasn't going to be able to go and do all my Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve, I managed to actually get it done a little bit early, and I don't know how many other people have followed the same trajectory. But I think, it's interesting. I think I'm also interested to see now post-Christmas trends and see what happens now with so much volume going through Christmas online particularly. I'm curious as to how the logistics and distribution networks are coping with all the reverse logistics, because of course it's very hard to take product back into stores right now. There are so few stores open, or a lot of the Christmas returns going back through digital routes and distribution routes through couriers, and I as yet haven't heard anything on that side. There's been very precious little discussion about it, and I'm wondering how how Royal Mail and others are coping with that right now, and retailers themselves. Are operational capacities managing to cope with that side of things? That's a question. I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot, Rob. In that case, how are you dealing with the returns process right now?
Well, I guess we're lucky that toys isn't like fashion, and our returns rate is very low. So it's 2 or 3%. So we haven't got enormous volumes like I'm sure lots of fashion retailers have. I think the biggest challenge actually for us, rather than returns, was click and collect orders, because we had that big challenge before Christmas where suddenly stores were being told to close outright. And we still had thousands of click and collect orders set out on the shop floor ready to be collected. So we had a big focus in those last couple of weeks before Christmas. I think if you placed a click and collect order from us, you got a text message every 30 seconds, I think, reminding you to go in there and pick it up. And that's almost been a bigger challenge than the returns. I don't think logistically it's so much getting it back. It's just the fact that lots of the places where you might do it are now just not open.
Yeah. If it's anything where I live, the queue outside the post office is far greater than the queue outside the supermarket right now. It's around the corner. I want to talk about what really influenced people to buy this year, what influenced that shopping, that purchase decision. Obviously we've seen the previous years discounting being really, really important. Were there other factors at play this year? I'm going to come to you first, Georgia.
Yeah, for sure. So we did a study with Wakefield that told us that better value was one of the biggest influences on consumers buying in 2020 compared to better availability, for example, that won out with the US market. But I think really what we saw was this doubling down on mobile and it being quite a unique opportunity to really truly A/B test and play around with different messaging and different communication to influence purchasing in a way that had been primarily split between online and in-store in the past, for example. So really leveraging things like, the abandoned cart message type communication. When do you send that? What's the tone? What channel is it on? It was time for that more than ever. And really looking at kind of replicating or redefining a shop floor experience in an online world. So for a lot of the teams that we were working with, it looked at completely auditing what was being said online before and then really looking to redefine life cycle and communication around that Christmas period. And I guess with that in mind, and to echo what everyone else was saying, we were seeing that communication starting more soon than ever. So not just trying to push people online, but also communicating much earlier. So a really big increase in email and mobile communications going out in the 8 weeks prior to Black Friday and Christmas, and then actually a year-on-year decrease in email and push notifications going out during the actual Christmas period. So really leveraging that marketing and customer communication tool set to influence purchasing and to not try and fall over, I think, as you said earlier, Rob. So, we had to wrap our heads around queuing on a website for the first time in 2020. So really making sure that you're using those digital channels to influence positive experiences in the lead up to purchase, as well as mitigating negative experiences that could also deter purchase.
Emily, tell me about your world, because you've talked a lot about kind of personal gifts and people wanting it, particularly during these kind of lockdowns and when we haven't been able to see our friends and family, to give something incredibly thoughtful. So what do you think has been the big drivers for your customers to purchase?
Yes. So, whilst I totally agree with Georgia, and I think this was definitely top of our list as well, deliveries and really trust with the brand, establishing that was definitely key. I think besides that, there's been a lot happening this year. And, in terms of how a customer would choose brand that they would shop with, they would shop with more brands than they would have in the past because of obviously moving everything online. But I think there is also a choice with what brand they shop with based on their values and based on what they've got to offer. So things around, like I mentioned earlier, around shopping small, shopping local, really supporting that local economy was one of the things that we've seen. The other ones was around, obviously we've had the Black Lives Matter movement at the beginning of the year, and that's really brought out quite a lot from the customers and really understanding what our brand's standing for. Are they in line with the values that I have? We're talking here about sustainability. We're talking about diversity and inclusion, etc. So I think sort of just before that quarter, there's been quite a lot of talk, on social networks, and there's been lots of scrutiny. So as we sort of moved into Christmas, we've really seen that, really talking openly, brands that actually have a position and also have the ability to sort of resonate with the customer. So having your finger on the pulse around all the customer mindset and all those aspects was critically important. As a brand on the high street, we've really had a focus on all of these things, and I think that really started, and we've learned a lot around the first lockdown. And so as we moved into Christmas, we were able to develop. So first of all, looking at our product range, so really developing product range that was in line with what the customer wanted and what we've seen in terms of searches, sentiment, etc. So like I mentioned, the hugs, the sort of letterbox gifting, etc. And really, I mean, we do a lot around personalization. We do a lot around unique and thoughtful gifting, something that is a little bit more special. And we've really seen that transparent to what people were buying. So the sort of there was a lot of self-treating. So really around the Christmas decoration and making your home. And there was a lot around those tokens of appreciation and tokens of love as well. So I think, we've come to a point that the pandemic kept us indoors and really sort of, cut us off from having that social life and having those interactions with the ones we love. And I think we've definitely seen throughout the year, and even more in that quarter, that transparent in what people were purchasing and what direction they were taking in terms of brand they were shopping with as well.
Tell me about your world, Rob. What were the big factors that influenced purchase for your customers?
So it was interesting hearing Emily talk about, I guess, supporting independent retailers. I think it felt like a year where consumers almost realised what the consequences were of some of their shopping decisions. And we posted things on social media about support your local high street, and people almost had that understanding of the fact that suddenly a high street retailer like The Entertainer needs people to shop with it, needs people to go out and support it. And we got a tremendous reaction to those sort of posts on social, but previously I don't think we would have done. The other key drivers, I think, really, it was just about the situations that people were in. So I mean, obviously we've talked about fulfillment being absolutely huge as a driver to us. Price being much less important this year from our experience. I don't think it was a year where you needed the best promotion necessary. I don't think that was what kind of top of what customers were worried about. I think probably the other thing that was really key was payment, and offering customers that opportunity to buy now and then pay later. And Andy was going to have to close his ears now because I'm going to talk about our experience with Klarna. But just getting Klarna live was really key for us, and it was amazing kind of the uptick we got from Klarna almost straight away. And there's that huge demand for that, and obviously with the situations that lots of people are in at the moment, offering them that easy way to stack a payment is really important. I think probably an area we'll carry on investing in this year.
Obviously, I'm going to have to come to Andy now in that case. To tell me more about the payment side of things. Tell me more about, how important an option it was that this buy now, pay later payment this Christmas.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that it was a big success for Roth, because I think buy now, pay later has become really, really important in the UK market. I think especially as consumers have a level of uncertainty about the future, and they're considering budgeting in a very different way than they have done before, because they're thinking about where they're going to be in 3 months' time, or focus on their job and so forth. And I think if you look at credit card penetration declining over the generations, it really is on a downward trend. The number of people who are willing to take take out credits and pay punitive interest rates. And buy now, pay later's flipped it on its head. And so you effectively can budget and split a payment across a number of months of repayment. And with OpenPay, we allow customers up to 5 or 6 months of repayments with completely interest-free. And of course, that gives control to the consumer in a way that they haven't really had before. With interest, with credit cards, of course, you either have to pay it off or you start incurring quite a lot of interest. And so I think that ability for customers to do that has been quite transformative for many customers. And we had the best Christmas we've ever had, and many of our clients seeing repeat customers coming back and using the buy now, pay later services over and over again, because it's such a brilliant way of controlling your finances and giving customers the ability to control their finances than they've had before. And I think that will continue. That, I mean, there's a few of us in the market doing it. We're slightly different to Klarna in that we have slightly longer plans, but I think the buy now, pay later is definitely been transformative in this market. And I think in these uncertain times, it's a great tool for customers to be able to manage their finances more effectively than they can with more traditional credit services like credit cards.
Obviously, we're talking today about this very different Christmas, but I'm sure there's a lot of trends that we've seen during this highly unusual year that we think are going to continue and prevail in 2021. So I am going to put you all on the spot here and ask you what you think the big trend that will prevail in 2021 will be. So I'm going to go to you first, Emily.
I think there are a couple of things. I think that first, I would just say, like, internally, we've learned a lot from the pandemic. I think in terms of how agile we are in our approach, how we've sort of changed our marketing mix, how we are thinking about messaging to our customers. So I think that's something that we're going to carry on. I think from a customer trends perspective, we've seen that this year home and food and drinks became very popular, at least for us. And I think that's something that's going to carry on into next year. Obviously, I mean, we're likely to be in lockdown, dare I say, probably until the end of March. Potentially, not sure, hoping for a much better outcome, but at least at this stage, trying to be not too optimistic. But I think as the lockdown will ease and as the restriction will ease, we really need to think about what the mindset is going to be like. And I think we're going to have probably something a little bit similar to what we've seen at Christmas, where there's definitely going to be a lot of self-treating, but there is definitely going to be a repositioning towards, like, maybe things like travel, the outdoor, etc. But I definitely think that self-treating and still, home and the food and drink area is going to continue. I think as well, in terms of thinking about retention as well. And a lot of customers have experienced new brands in last year. Some of them would have had a great experience because some brands would have really worked hard around that retention. I mean, if you think about all those customers, most brands have acquired in the first lockdown. There's been a lot of work for a lot of CRM team to nurture those customers into the golden quarter and then continue. And I think that there's going to be some payoff around that. And I would think that there's going to be a continuing trend around retention and how marketers are going to focus on that. And also around customers being very aware of what brands value are, what they stand for, and how they're going to communicate about it. I think there's definitely going to need to be more continuous transparency around that messaging. I think that's definitely the new customer expectations as we move into 2021.
Georgia, I'm going to go to you now. What's the big trend you think is going to continue into 2021?
I'm nodding like a crazy thing because I completely agree, Emily. I think we know that more conversations happened online than ever last year, and that trend is really here to stay. So with 83% of consumers saying that they plan to shop online just as much, if not more, moving into 2021. So now is really the time to buckle down on retention and make sure that you don't have this kind of leaky bucket system of everyone that you've worked so hard to acquire going in. And I think kind of just, again, to reiterate what you said there, Emily, but you've got this concept of people playing around with new brands for the first time, nearly a quarter of people buying from somewhere for the first time last year. So for retailers, they're kind of gaining these new adjacent audiences that maybe didn't make up the consumer base last year, that they need to learn how to speak to and treat differently. But they're also seeing their loyal consumers starting to shift away from them. So being able to really understand consumer behavior and have different conversations with different people is more important than ever, because this whole kind of consumer shift that happened last year means that you've got to be empathetic with people who are coming to you and understand the reasons why.
Both close alignment, ladies. Great. Rob, how about yourself?
So I think almost the key thing I've learned from last year was that I'm absolutely hopeless at forecasting how consumers are going to react to the pandemic. So I don't think that's part of the strategy for this year. I think where we were successful last year was not in getting predictions right, because I got almost all of them wrong. But it was in almost being prepared for the absolute edge cases of high and low and left and right, and then being incredibly agile in reacting to them. So I think if there is a trend, it's going to be that retailers need to be agile and need to move quickly. I think it's going to be the retailers that can move fastest and spot what's happening quickest that are going to be successful.
Good stuff. And Andy, over to you.
Oh, well, I mean, I think the big shift into online will continue, and as everybody's talked about, and I think alignment to customers is that, obviously the most important thing about retailing generally is just making sure you know who your customers are, you know what they want, and you align as closely as you can to that. I think there've been a number of shifts. I think product. I think fashion is going to continue to struggle a little bit whilst we remain in lockdown. I think there'll be, once we're out of lockdown and we can hopefully post-vaccination, when the majority of population are all safe, then there will be a resurgence of people wanting to go out and all that pent-up frustration of being locked inside for so long, and we may see a big kick up for fashion. But till then, I think fashion's going to struggle, although some categories, leisure wear and some athlete wear and that sort of thing, will continue to do well. So I think other product categories, like in the summer, the first lockdown, gardening was huge. I think obviously over Christmas has been quieter, but I think as spring comes about and we're still locked down, everyone will be very focused on their gardens, and so there'll be a huge. If I was a betting man, I'd be putting some money on the Kingfisher share price. I would also say I think craft work and craftware at home. People doing home crafting and that sort of thing. Anything to do for inside activities to do with kids and stuff. I think you'll see a big trend towards that. Marketing's really interesting, and I think we haven't talked about that much, but I think marketing trends, clearly outdoor right now, no one's going to spend an awful lot of money on outdoor, and certainly all the big spenders on the underground and in London, the city centres, will be looking at where to put that above the line activity. I think things like in-game advertising have seen a huge resurgence, as has TV, and I think those are two of the channels that I think will continue to see a lot of take up, a lot more activity from brands who haven't explored those sorts of areas before, investing in those and trialing them out. And as the guy said before, George said before, about innovation, and I think the brands that really innovate the most will be the ones that succeed. And obviously, lastly, it'd be remiss of me not to talk about payments. I think there has been a huge shift on payments and a focus on payments and new and innovative ways for consumers to pay and manage their finances. And I think buy now, pay later is, the biggest trend in that arena. It's been we've seen huge growth in buy now, pay later in the last 2 years, and particularly in the lockdown in the last 6 to 8 months. And I think that will really continue in the new year as consumers are looking for ways to more intelligently and smarter ways to manage their finances without incurring huge credit card interest bills. And I think that means that those retailers who have embraced that, and Rob talked about Klarna already. I'm sure he'll be looking at other options for his buy now pay later suite. But I think that's, people will have multiple buy now pay later providers, just like they have multiple credit card providers. And I think that's a big trend for this coming year.
Well, I think that is a fantastic point to bring things to an end. You've all given us your view of what 2021's got in store. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of our panellists. It's been a fascinating chat. And of course, thanks to our audience. Thank you for tuning in. We shall see you in the next webinar.